Literature is not just about words on a page. It's a reflection of the time, culture, people, societies, and history. Over the centuries, various literary movements have shaped the art of storytelling, each introducing new themes, philosophies, and styles that have left a lasting impact on literature as we know it. These movements are more than historical markers. They are living traditions that continue to influence writers today. Let's now explore some of the most significant literary movements, their central themes, iconic writers, and the legacy they leave behind. Focusing heavily on ancient Greek and Roman mythology, history, and philosophy, the classical literature from 1200 BCE to 500 CE forms the bedrock of Western literary tradition. This period is characterized by its emphasis on order, harmony, and balance, reflecting the ideals of the classical world. Central themes were heroism and the epic journey. Stories like Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey are centered on heroic figures like Achilles and Odysseus, whose adventures illustrate not just physical courage, but moral and intellectual virtues. Fate and the divine. The gods play a central role in classical literature, often shaping the destinies of mortal characters. The tension between fate and free will is a recurring theme. Philosophical inquiry. Works such as Plato's The Republic and Aristotle's Poetics laid the foundations for Western philosophy and the literary criticism, focusing on morality, justice, and the nature of reality. The works of this era have shaped the structure of narratives, from epics and tragedies to philosophical dialogues, laying the groundwork for the future of Western literature. The time period between 500 and 1500 CE is about medieval literature, which is deeply rooted in religion, chivalry, and the moral codes of the time. Central themes were religious allegory, such as Dante's The Divine Comedy, depicting a symbolic journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven. Chivalry and court de love, tales of knights such as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, often center around themes of honor, bravery, and unattainable love, reflecting the ideals of medieval society. The quest for redemption. Much of medieval literature, including works like Beowulf, revolves around the hero's quest for redemption or salvation, either in a literal sense, like fighting monsters, or a spiritual one.
Renaissance. The true driving force for the humanity in transition from Middle Age to modernity. Started in the 14th century and continuing through the 17th century, it was a period of cultural and intellectual rebirth in Europe with a profound effect worldwide. One of the most significant aspects of the Renaissance was the emphasis on humanism, the belief in the potential and worth of individuals. This shift in thinking challenged the traditional and philosophical views of the Middle Ages. It began in Florence and expanded in overall Italy, including merchant locations Genoa and Venice, which were flourishing as a result of the trade activities with other countries and continents, including Asia.
With the revival of classical learning and the blossoming of the arts, 14th to 17th century is marked by the Renaissance literature, which is characterized by a renewed interest in humanism, individualism, and the complexities of the human experience. Central themes were humanism. Renaissance writers, influenced by classical Greek and Roman texts, placed a new emphasis on human potential and individual experience. This period saw a shift from divine-centered narratives to human-centered ones. Exploration of the self. Writers like William Shakespeare delved deeply into the human psyche, exploring themes of ambition, jealousy, love, and power in plays such as Hamlet and Macbeth. Political and social commentary. Literature became a means of exploring political and social structures. For instance, The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli offered a pragmatic, often cynical guide to political leadership. the Renaissance gave us some of the most enduring works of literature, many of which are still studied and performed today for their insight into the human condition. Late 17th century to 18th century refer to neoclassicism, characterized as a return to the order, logic, and restraint of classical antiquity. The prefix neo means modern or new. Neoclassicism was born in Rome, Italy. Its popularity expanded throughout Europe as a generation of European art students finishing their grand tour returned from Italy to their home countries with newly rediscovered Greco-Roman ideals. Reacting against the emotional excess of the Renaissance, neoclassical writers sought to create works that were rational, controlled, and satirical. Central themes were reason and order. Neoclassicism emphasizes reason, logic, and restraint. This is reflected in its structured forms and didactic purpose. Writers like Alexander Pope used heroic couplets and strict poetic forms to critique society. Social critique. Many neoclassical works were satirical, using wit to comment on societal flaws. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels is a famous example, critiquing human nature, politics, and the absurdity of society. Morality. Neoclassical writers often focused on teaching moral lessons, advocating for virtue and the adherence to social norms. Neoclassicism's focus on logic and reason laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, influencing the political and intellectual revolutions of the 18th century. Late 18th century to mid-19th century was the period for Romanticism. It emerged as a reaction against the rationality of neoclassicism and the Industrial Revolution, celebrating emotion, imagination, and the beauty of nature. Central themes were emotion over reason. Romantic writers rejected the cold logic of neoclassicism in favor of passionate, emotional expression. Works like Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley delve into the sublime and the terrifying aspects of the human experience. Nature is a source of inspiration. Nature plays a pivotal role in Romantic literature, often depicted as a source of beauty, mystery, and spiritual renewal. William Wordsworth famously celebrated the power of nature in his poetry. Individualism. The Romantics celebrated the individual quest for meaning, often focusing on misunderstood or outcast figures, such as Lord Byron's Byronic hero, brooding, passionate, and rebellious.
In the late 18th century, a storm was brewing in the heart of France. On the 14th of July 1789, a group of Parisian revolutionaries seized the Bastille prison in a dramatic act of protest against the king. The storming of the Bastille was the start of the French Revolution, and liberty, equality, fraternity was the slogan reflecting the demand for change.
The early period of the Romantic era was a time of war with the French Revolution from 1789 to 1799, followed by the Napoleonic Wars until 1815. Those wars and the political and social environment that went along with them served as the background for Romanticism. Romanticism's focus on the individual, emotion, and the sublime has had a lasting impact on both literature and culture and continues to influence modern storytelling. Mid-19th century to early 20th century was about realism, which emerged as a response to Romanticism idealism, focusing on the depiction of everyday life and the struggles of ordinary people. Realists sought to portray life as it was, without the embellishments of earlier literary movements. Central themes were the struggles of ordinary people. Realist writers often focused on the lives of the working class and the poor, highlighting social injustice and the harsh realities of life. Charles Dickens, for example, used his novels to critique the social inequalities of Victorian England. Social and political issues. Realism brought attention to the societal changes brought by industrialization, capitalism, and organization. Novels like Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary explore the effects of these changes on individuals. Rejection of idealism. Realist writers often depicted life without sentimentality or idealization, focusing instead on the complexities and contradictions of human experience. Realism's influence on literature was profound, paving the way for modernism by emphasizing the complexity of life and the limitations of traditional storytelling.